I'm Girish Kumar, and in this short video, I'm going to discuss how income inequality affects public health. The first question is, how does income inequality impact a nation's health even when comparing countries with similar wealth? To answer this, I've created a scatter plot where I use infant mortality on the vertical axis as a key indicator for public health and the Gini index, a measure of inequality, on the horizontal axis. To make a fair comparison between economies, I've colored each country by its GDP per capita band, which allows me to analyze the trend among all countries with similar economic strength. The key insight comes from looking at the pattern within a single color. For example, among the green dot representing countries in the same economic band, there's a clear upward trend. As inequality increases, infant mortality also tends to rise. My analysis shows that the wealth alone doesn't guarantee good health. Higher income inequality is strongly associated with worse health outcomes, suggesting the distribution of wealth is a critical factor for a country's well being. The second question is there a threshold of income inequality beyond which infant mortality significantly increases? To investigate this, I built a scatter plot mapping the Gini index on the x axis against infant mortality on the y axis. I then added two vertical reference lines at Gini values of 40 and 50 to act as personal thresholds, helping me usually inspect for any abrupt changes in the data's pattern. Looking at the plot, there isn't a single cliff edge moment where mortality suddenly spikes. However, it's noticeable that many of the countries with most severe infant mortality rates, those above 100, appear when the Gini index is between 35 and 45. While high inequality above 50 is also associated with poor outcomes, the data is more sparse. My interpretation is that while there is no single magic number, the risk of significantly worse health outcomes appears to grow substantially once inequality enters this moderate to high range. The third question is, do countries with high literacy and education access exhibit lower income inequality? To find out, I created this scatter plot. The horizontal x-axis shows a country's literacy rate, a proxy for education, while the vertical y-axis measures income inequality using the Gini index. Each dot represents a country mapping its literacy against its inequality level. The plot reveals a distinct downward trend. As we move to the right and literacy rate increases, the corresponding Gini index tends to decrease, indicating more equality. Notice how countries with literacy above 90% are clustered at the bottom with lower Gini scores, while countries with lower literacy exhibit a much wider and higher range of inequality. My analysis confirms a strong association. Higher national literacy is a key characteristic of more economically equitable countries. The fourth question is the impact of income inequality on public health stronger in low income countries than in high income ones? To compare these groups, I've created another scatter plot of Gini versus infant mortality. This time I've colored dots based on country's income level: blue for high income, orange for middle income, and red for low income. This allows me to isolate and compare the trend for each group separately. The plot reveals three distinct patterns. The blue dots, the high income countries, are clustered at the bottom with very low infant mortality and inequality, shows little additional impact. In stark contrast, for the red and orange dots, the low and middle income countries, the relationship is much stronger. Here, a rise in the Gini index is clearly associated with a significant increase in infant mortality. My analysis confirms that the answer is yes. The detrimental impact of income inequality on public health is far more pronounced and severe in developing nations than in wealthy ones. The fifth question is, can countries with same level of inequality measured by Palma ratio still have very different health outcomes? To explore this, I grouped countries into vertical bands based on their Palma ratio, which you can see on the horizontal axis. Within each band, I've plotted the infant mortality rate for each country in that group on the vertical axis. The visual evidence is striking. Looking at any single vertical band, for instance, countries with a Palma ratio of 2, we see a massive range in infant mortality from very low to extremely high. This high variance proves that knowing a country's inequality level alone isn't enough to predict its health outcomes. It strongly implies that other critical factors like healthcare systems, governance, and education play a huge role in how a society translates its economic structure into well being for its citizens. The sixth question is, do countries with similar inequality levels show different health outcomes based on factors like urbanization? To explore this, I built a bubble chart. The x-axis is the Gini index and the y-axis is infant mortality. The key variable here is the size of bubble, which represents size of country's service sector acting as a proxy for urbanization. Larger bubbles mean more urbanized nations. To find the answer, I can look at any vertical slice of the chart, which shows countries with similar levels of inequality. For example, at a Gini index near 40, we see bubbles of all sizes. Critically, many of larger bubbles, the more urbanized countries in this group have lower infant mortality than the smaller ones. This suggests that the answer is yes. Even when inequality is held constant, the factors like urbanization and development it implies can contribute to better public health outcomes. The seventh question is: has the reduction in inequality over time led to measurable improvements in health outcomes? To answer this, I've used a box plot showing recent infant mortality on the y axis. Critically, the x axis groups countries based on how their Gini index has changed over at the last decade, from most improved on the left to most worsened on the right. The result here is fascinating and complex. Instead of a simple downward trend, the median infant mortality rates from U shape, while the most improved group enjoys low infant mortality and stable group surprisingly shows highest median mortality. This suggests a reduction in inequality doesn't automatically guarantee the best health outcomes on its own. The relationship is not linear and it implies that other factors like a country's starting point and overall development path are deeply intertwined with how changes in inequality affect public health. The eighth question is: what patterns emerge when comparing income inequality with healthcare access across different countries of the world? To answer this, I've placed two box plots side by side on a dashboard. The left plot shows the distribution of the Palma ratio, my measure for inequality, while right plot shows phones per thousand people, which I'm using as a proxy for infrastructure and healthcare access. By comparing these plots region by region, a strong inverse pattern emerges. Regions that typically exhibit high and widespread inequality on the left, like sub-Saharan Africa, consistently show low and limited healthcare access on the right. Conversely, regions with low inequality, such as Western Europe, almost always have high levels of access. This side by side comparison makes the pattern clear. High income inequality and poor access to essential services are challenges that are often deeply interconnected on a regional level. The ninth question is: how does income share of poorest 40% of population correlate with key social welfare indicators? To analyze this, I created a dashboard of three scatter plots. They all share the same horizontal axis, the income share of the bottom 40%, while the vertical axis track literacy, infant mortality, and GDP. The trend lines tell a powerful and a consistent story. There's a strong positive correlation with literacy and GDP. As the income share for the poorest citizen rises, these indicators of well being also rise. Simultaneously, there's a clear negative correlation with infant mortality, which falls as equality increases. The unified conclusion from this is that a more equitable society is healthier and more prosperous one. When the bottom 40% has larger share of the income, the entire country benefits. The 10th question is: do countries with more equitable income distribution have a higher percentage of elderly population? To answer this, I would create a scatter plot. On the horizontal axis, I would place the Gini index, where the lower values mean more equality, and on the vertical axis, I would plot the percentage of population aged 65 and older. Based on the expected trend, the plot would likely reveal a notable negative correlation. Countries with lower Gini index, the more equitable societies, would tend to cluster higher on the chart, indicating a larger elderly population. This is because factors often associated to low inequality, like strong healthcare and social safety nets, lead to longer life expectancies. My conclusion would be that a more equitable income distribution is a strong characteristic of nations with an older demographic profile.